All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us. We have over 100 people signed up, so people will be rolling in as we get started, but thank you for being here with us to kick things off. Welcome. I'm Brett Greene from New Tech Northwest, the umbrella organization for the Pacific Northwest tech community. And a big part of what we do are help people connect to other organizations and resources in the community, a couple of which are friends of ours, sea.city and Create33, who we're very excited to come together with tonight to host this event for you. We'll explore where Seattle, Washington, and America are all heading after the election. As you may know, we've had a historic turnout rate. We nationally was around 70%, statewide around 85%. And it appears state politics are pretty much going to be the way they've been for quite a while. But there's going to be a lot more movement nationally as the Republicans pick up some seats in Congress, and it appears that Biden is going to be our anticipated president. So tonight's agenda, we'll start by diving into these results, along with an outstanding lineup of tech leaders moderated by Rebecca Lovell. Then Nick Merriam from sea.city and Matt Oppenheimer, CEO of Remitly, will wrap things up with a keynote conversation. So there will be Q&A during the panel. So if you have questions, please use the Q&A function or the chat to submit your questions. And if you have any technical problems or you need to speak with a host, you can send a chat for that also. So without further ado, please welcome Rebecca Lovell, Executive Director of Create33 and longtime leader in the startup community, to introduce tonight's panel. Welcome, Rebecca.
Great, thank you, Brett and Nick, and hello, everyone. We are, as Brett said, delighted to have these technology and civic leaders take time out of their busy days to share their take on this election season and really how it matters in all of our daily lives. Quick introductions. I wish I could go through their impressive resumes, but just at a high level, we do have Racquel Russell, VP of Partner Success at Zillow. She's the former head of government and public affairs there, and formerly may describe herself as the chief storyteller in the Obama administration on issues in her portfolio, such as healthcare. We also have Jonathan Sposato, the chair of both Geekwire and PicMonkey, the author of Better Together, founder of Yoke TV, and former chair of the United Way King County annual fundraising campaign. Next up, we have Heather Redman, co-founder and managing partner of Flying Fish venture capital firm. She is chair of the Washington Technology Industry Association, former chair of the Greater Seattle Chamber of Commerce, and a WSU regent, among her many accomplishments. And last but not least, wearing several hats this evening, but most of all as an individual resident here in our region, Harini Gokul. She is a tech leader with over 20 years of experience as such tech titans as IBM, Microsoft, and now a customer solutions leader at AWS, and a volunteer member of the Medina City Council. Thank you for your service. Please give as warm as possible as Zoom welcome to all of our panelists. All right, thank you. And as Brett mentioned, I'm Rebecca Lovell. I am currently the executive director here at Create33, and I also chair the Center of American Entrepreneurship in the Other Washington. We meet with elected and appointed federal officials to promote policy supporting startups. I'm also a recovering local government official, having led the city of Seattle's Office of Economic Development. So all of these issues are very close to home, and I can't wait to dive into the conversation. One note that actually at Racquel's excellent suggestion I want to share is when we all met together, we very quickly realized that though this is a nonpartisan event, we found ourselves gravitating toward a particular camp. So I just want to own and acknowledge that and encourage thoughtful discussion and debate amongst all of us and then all of you when we engage a little bit later on in the Q&A. So just to underscore some of Brett's great points about this election cycle, this one is pretty unusual, being in the midst of a pandemic, although I'd argue at least two pandemics, including institutionalized racism, very much on the ballot as well. Some things remain the same, as Brett mentioned. As always, we have a host of King County ballot initiatives. Governor Jay Inslee handily won a third term in office. But we also have some really notable firsts. Marilyn Strickland, who's the former Tacoma mayor and former CEO of the Greater Seattle Chamber of Commerce, was elected to Congress representing Washington's 10th district. She's the first African-American to represent Washington state and the first Korean-American elected to Congress. Hard stop. And nationally, we have our first Black vice president, our first Asian American vice president, and our first woman vice president-elect in Kamala Harris. So let's go ahead and set the stage. I've asked each of the panelists to weigh in as the spirit moves them. You might not hear from every one of them on every topic. I will call out some of you on areas that I know are of particular interest for you. But to each of you, I'd love to hear, what is your key takeaway? Might be hard to pick just one from the 2020 elections. Let's go ahead and start with Heather.
Okay, we figured out how to turn our video on, but then there's the great unmute. So I proved it can be done. Step one. So it is hard to pick one, but I would say both locally and nationally, despite the extremely rugged and partisan and just nasty fight all along the way, net, it appears to me that both locally and nationally, we are headed toward a more moderate overall set of ruling politicians in whatever sort of jurisdiction you look at. Now, we don't know if that'll be proven out in the city council elections, that will come around next year here in Seattle. But if you look at, folks like Maryland, you look at Joe Biden, you see that the moderate is making headway, and not moderates that don't have very progressive agendas, but folks who message reaching across the aisle, people who talk about the economy, who are pro-business, and who are, backing away from language that demonizes anyone. And so I am a eternal optimist, and that's kind of what I get paid to do. And so, maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I feel like we're heading into a period where, at least on the Democratic side of the aisle, there is going to be a move to more moderation. And again, I want to distinguish the policies, which I think will still be very progressive by historic Democratic standards, from the rhetoric and approach.
Excellent. Focusing on substance over style. Not surprising there. Thank you, Heather. Racquel, let's hear from you.
Sure. I think for me, my biggest takeaway had to have been the turnout. And the voter turnout across the country. And my hope that, I think that we've always had this struggle, especially since we're here talking a lot about civic engagement tonight. We've always had this struggle to really articulate for many people in this country why their vote matters and why they should vote. And I think, this election cycle, we were able to crack that code a bit in various communities across the country. And so that is my biggest takeaway, because the thing that makes me most optimistic is how important and how powerful someone's vote can be, and folks starting to recognize that. So that's my biggest takeaway.
Thank you. So regardless of your orientation, count one in the win column for turnout. Great, thanks, Racquel. Let's go to Jonathan.
Thanks so much, and I very much agree with the smart things that Heather and Racquel both said. It is really, in fact, hard to find just one takeaway, because there are so many takeaways. But just to find something that's a little bit different, it's this kind of overall idea of it ain't over. And I don't mean it literally like right now Trump hasn't conceded. I don't mean that that isn't over. But what I mean is that this as Heather astutely said, this return to a more moderate, the bankability of more moderate candidates, both nationally and also locally, is really part of an overall larger pattern where you see this pendulum swinging back and forth in our country. You had 2 terms of George W. Bush, right? Then followed very quick, immediately by 2 terms of Obama, and then Donald Trump, which for conservatives was really arguably a reaction against Obama. And now we have a return to somebody more moderate. And so when I say it ain't over, I mean, what may happen in 2024, right? And also one other way that gives me this takeaway is how numerically, I'm very happy that Biden won by a popular majority in addition to an electoral majority. But if you look at the scale of the popular majority, there's like less than 6 million vote difference, actually, right? So when you have, I think that we've all heard this, when you have 70+ million people who voted for Trump still, and that's nearly half of the country, that supports this sort of argument that this pendulum is kind of in any time of change, it's going to kind of swing back and forth or zigzag back and forth a few times before it kind of stabilizes, if it does at all. So for me, the key takeaway is it ain't over just because Joe Biden got elected. So.
All right, fellow geek Jonathan, employing some math, calling out there's a larger denominator here, so a big margin might not be as big as it felt 4 years ago, as well as bringing in the physics concept of every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Thank you, Jonathan. Let's move to Harini.
I love the it ain't over, and I'll take that and go another place with it, which is you started off, Rebecca, by telling us how we made the record books, right, this year. Washington especially elected the most diverse, most representative legislature in I think in our state's history, right? We tripled the number of women of color who got elected. We talked about Marilyn Strickland, Twynia Nobles got elected to 28th, which was huge. And there are so many other role models, but it ain't over because I loved all the excitement leading up to the elections. I loved we couldn't doorbell this year, but you called and you wrote and you did all this work to mobilize, and it ain't over because the work starts now. We've got these incredible talented leaders, and I'm Kamala Harris, of course, Vice President-elect Harris. We've got them a seat at the table now, and the work starts now. Right? They will bring their perspective to issues. They will bring their perspective and shed light on new challenges. So what I want us to leave in this conversation, one thing is stay engaged, continue to mobilize, keep doing the work because it ain't over.
Great call out, Harini, and really emphasizing that we could be at the precipice of a movement, not just a moment. So how do we keep it going? I want to stay with you actually along those lines for the next question, if I could. And I called out just a few of your accomplishments, your time in tech, your volunteering as a city council member. But beyond that, you've been engaged in organizations such as the Female Founder Alliance and Future for Us. You have an amazing track record of being an advocate for equity. There were lots of issues on the ballot that could be interpreted as a movement in that direction, whether that happens to be one's lens on law enforcement oversight, or even such subtleties as changing language from citizen to public, right? That kind of speaks to larger immigration issues. So beyond the ballot, as a fellow member of the public, what civic tools might we all employ in service of addressing these systemic issues? And, what kinds of policies or programs could drive this forward?
I think it's such a great question. And this was a great year, right? For the ballot, up and down, we saw issues of equity and social justice show up in all kinds of sort of prominent and not so prominent ways. What I want to see is continue this investment in keeping this conversation top of mind, moving beyond hashtags, moving beyond what I call diversity theater, right? We've seen a lot of different symbols of progress in the right direction, but we need some radical change to put in place more systemic, sustainable approaches for engagement, for participation. And I'll go back to, for me, top of mind is it's making sure everyone has a seat at the table. So when I spoke about the tremendous number of women of color running, it's exciting for what they represent, because many of us do not have a clear playbook to go do that, right? The number of role models are not always there. The networks are not always there. So what I love is any societal equity issues need to make sure that we have the right folks at the table co-creating the strategy with us, making sure that we have their voice heard as we create strategy. There's different ways to do that. We need to encourage more women to run. We need to equip them with training, with tools, with resources. There's lots of organizations that do great work on it. I love Equality Can't Wait. I love the Ascend Fund. I love One America, and I'll stop with 3 because I could keep going on and on and on. But I'll come back to make a change, you need to see yourself represented in your governments. Our politicians need to look more like their communities. That is the reason I ran. And I ran for local office because I wanted to give back to my community. But the effort it takes, the networks it takes to get there cannot be underestimated. So if you're listening to this and you can be a better ally, or if you're inspired to run, know that there are many resources out there for you.
Absolutely. Lots to unpack. You know, performative allyship isn't going to do it, but not all of us have the stomach to run for public office as you have, but can't underscore enough how important it is to have representation. Thank you again for your service. I know all of you, Racquel, Jonathan, Heather, even beyond your day jobs, you're very civically engaged. Any tips specifically in the realm of diversity and inclusion that you can recommend to this audience to get engaged in the fight?
You know, I think for me, and Harini said it so well, is that it really is about having a seat at that table and making sure those voices are represented. But one thing I will say when I think about allyship, you know, if you're at a table, especially in a civic role, and you see that there are communities that are not represented at the table, speak up for them, right? Have their voice. That is one very actionable thing that everyone can do, even if you are not part of one of those communities that are underrepresented. But then also, I think it's about encouraging others to engage and get involved. Because, you know, allyship is great, but I think to Harini's point, it's something about, you know, not just for you to be able to be the voice for your community, but for others following you to see you there and paving that way, I think is really important as well.
Great tips. And Racquel, you used a technique that I love, that I borrow liberally from Michelle Obama, which is when you are in a room with other people at the table who often get overlooked or stepped on, so important to amplify their voice and not just repeat their idea, but use their name. So thank you.
It was a White House trick we used in the Obama White House. So yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Jonathan, Heather, if you'd like to chime in, please do. But
I would just say, you know, there's so many organizations to be involved with here, and the ability to just get involved in really any organization you want that is addressing the need for equity and inclusion, and then to bring it back to your other sort of parts of your life is hugely impactful. And if you can combine that with being politically engaged in some way, so sort of it's a 3-part thing of go, you know, pick a group to get engaged with, then be sure you're connecting that group to all the other nodes of your life, including your work life, and then bring all of that experience into the political process. So, you know, be part of a sea.city event. Get involved with, you know, your local elections or the national elections, whatever it is. You're just bringing more perspective. You're like taking that, you know, that very concentrated experience and bringing it into the larger, you know, aquifer or something that really needs to have that great experience spread more broadly. So it's super simple. It's not you don't have to sort of do backflips or anything. You just have to go have the experience and then share it, and then share the rest of your world back with the folks that you are engaged with, who are working on diversity and inclusion. And there are lots of opportunities to do that here locally.
Love it. Social capital is so important, and connecting the dots. And all of you panelists, I'm just going to be moving through these questions so we can cover as much as possible. Don't let me leave you behind though. So just wave at me or chime in if you do want to weigh in on any given topic. Jonathan, I see you.
Yeah, no, I'm just, and it's okay if you need to move on, and I'll keep this quick. I think my answer to your question about this is that I think can be summed up by little things matter, because they all add up to become big things. And in some ways, it's somewhat analogous to when it comes to diversity. and inclusion, it's somewhat analogous to when you work with the homeless, and when somebody works with the homeless, and we still have this problem in the city, is that oftentimes they struggle with, well, what should I do? Should I lobby for legislation that might somehow make housing more affordable? Or should I get in a van at night and give out sandwiches and blankets out to people? And my response to that is that it's all good. And sometimes the little things that, we have a tendency to be, if we're kind of type A, or we want to have a big impact, or we're ambitious, we want to get scale. We want to reach a lot of people. And sometimes you can operate in the abstract and do a lot of that quote unquote big stuff, but actually the small stuff matters just as much. And I think that in terms of diversity and inclusion, the small things matter. It's just simply, we're all busy, but if you can open your doors and give someone access, of the 10 people that are giving you access or asking for access, take stock of, well, like, who might I actually prioritize higher now, or should prioritize higher because to offset something, or who do I spend time actually mentoring? And I think that those little things matter a lot if we all do them, and they add up to big things.
No, that's great insight. And I think making these incremental changes over time reminds us all that this is a marathon, not a sprint, right? Deploy your energy in the best way possible for the long haul. That's actually a great segue to our next topic. And I want to call out a survey that sea.city did actually in 2019. So for context, let's acknowledge that was before the pandemic and other issues that are clearly of importance. But some of the issues that our very own tech community said were most important to them include homelessness and affordable housing, transit, job creation, immigration issues. All of these issues and more were on the ballot this year. So I want to dive in now with you, Racquel. Speaking of your roles at Zillow, you've been a leader on affordable housing issues, in many capacities. Mm-hmm. There was a passing of the ballot measure now enabling the county to sell land below market value for affordable housing purposes. Would love your thoughts on a few things, kind of how Zillow has engaged and use the tools in your toolkit to highlight and address these issues. If you want to speak to the impact of this particular measure, great. And then, what do you see ahead? What more needs to be done?
Absolutely. So I'll start with the measure and and work backwards. I think the measure obviously is a success story. There are so many administrative hurdles when it comes to affordable housing in our region. And the idea that King County, if they wanted to partner with an affordable housing developer to sell or lease land at below fair market value, could not do that when we have an affordable housing crisis is absurd, like just to be plain about it, right? And so the idea of removing that administrative hurdle is important. I don't think it's a silver bullet, and certainly there is a lot more that needs to be done, but I do think removing administrative burdens and hurdles like that should be table stakes at this point, right? And then we can innovate and be creative on how we solve the affordable housing and homelessness crisis in our region. I will say at the national level, just to kind of scope out, I am pretty excited at what we're going to see from a Biden-Harris administration. Very much so, housing is a local issue. One of the issues that I did handle for President Obama and that I was a senior advisor on was housing, and specifically affordable housing and homelessness. And, there are many levers at the national level that, an administration that is encouraged and inspired to help and make change can pull for, with local communities and local partners. So I'm excited to see what that looks like in a Biden-Harris administration in 2021 and beyond. With regards to Zillow and just what I also, think we here need to do, and others should definitely speak up, everyone on this panel is very much so active and engaged in this issue around affordable housing. Zillow by no means has a corner on this issue because we all have to be at the table. This is going to take all of us to really solve and to help. But at Zillow, for us, one of the things that we were really, clear-eyed on from the very beginning is we have our skill sets and our superpowers, but others have their skill sets and superpowers. So we realize that in order to make an impact, we we had to bring to the table what we could bring to the table and partner with those who had skill sets and superpowers that we don't. And what I mean by that is, things like the Innovation Advisory Council that was set up by our local leaders to bring the business community together and partner with government entities and quasi-government entities to solve issues that seem intractable, like affordable housing and homelessness. We here at Zillow partnered with the Housing Connector, still do, and have used our platform and our technological skills to build a platform that is helping the Housing Connector connect both case managers with private landlords who are looking to rent or willing to rent to clients of those case managers from various organizations. We could have tried to do it all ourselves, but there's only so much that we know. Partnering with the experts is where we can move the needle the most. So at Zillow, that is just one example of what we've done, but we've always used that as a guiding principle of how we engage and how we give back. Obviously, resources are important, and Zillow has certainly given funding, as well as many others in the business community have. But I think it's more than just resources. It's again finding those ways to partner, and Heather has been a leader in this space. I don't know, Heather, if you have anything else to add around the partnership piece.
Oh gosh, thank you, and hats off to everything that you've done, Racquel and Zillow. Yeah, so this is something that I think Rebecca wanted me to talk on anyway, so I'll kind of segue into that. Thank you for the excellent handoff, Racquel. Yeah, I loved what you said. This will take all of us, because you could apply that to homelessness, you could apply that to affordable housing, you could apply it to equitable educational outcomes, you could apply it to equitable job opportunities, equitable opportunities to start companies, for that matter, a world that I spend my time in. And what has frustrated me for a long time here locally, and I think has frustrated a lot of the business community, certainly the Chamber and WTIA at times as well, has been that lack of getting us all together to attack problems together. The business community and the civic community and the community organizations that are working on problems, and the individuals who are impacted by those problems, the communities that are impacted by the problems that we have. And I hope, this is my back to the moderate in approach, not necessarily moderate in the set of solutions that we need to implement. That's where I'm hoping that we can get back to a place where we recognize that there are a lot of shared values and a lot of shared goals in terms of what we want to achieve for our communities, and that we can bring business and the public sector together at a minimum, lots of other folks too, but at least break down some of the barriers between business and the public sector, as the Innovation Council did, and try to open up some dialogue there, because so much is based on relationships, and relationships is often just code for trust, right? So much is based on trust, and many grand bargains can be made when there's trust. And we do need business to step up and do some things, and we need wealthy individuals to step up and do some things in our society. The inequality and wealth gap is not helping anybody, and needs to be solved. So, but the atmosphere of trust ought to be able to be achieved locally in a light blue to dark blue political region such as ours. We should be able to break down those silos. So that would be my hope. And I guess, Rebecca, in terms of what we can do to guide government on how to help business, to get back on its feet as we come out of this, I think, some of the basics really are that relationship building and that trust. But also just being careful about taking care of the basics. There are just a lot of basic needs that need to be addressed, from mental health to housing to infrastructure to education, and those are obviously not all at the foot of one particular body of government. There's a variety of bodies of government that are responsible for those different spheres. but taking care of the basics ought to be, you know, what government is focused on all the time, but particularly in a time when we're coming out of all of this. And then really, you know, trying to make some things that are going to be benefits of the economy accessible to all. So I noticed a comment in the chat from someone who was formerly unhoused saying, hire us. And there is a program right now at the WTIA that is a great apprenticeship program that takes people from unemployment or a $30,000 a year on average salary to a $90,000 a year salary in much less than a year. And it doesn't require a college education. It doesn't require any particular training in advance. It just requires some aptitude. But that thing is not fully funded, you know, and it's not made accessible and supported in every way by all of the agencies that have a conduit from people that need those services to the jobs that ultimately come out the other end. So very simple things like that that would lead to the results that we all want to see, but employ business in a way that would help break down some of the systemic barriers that have existed.
Thank you. And we're going to come back to you on some other business and infrastructure implications. But before we leave this topic, thank you for amplifying Lauren's comment, not only around employability, but also I just want to call out, and each of us here, when we speak about homelessness, we are talking about an experience and a condition. People aren't homeless, they are experiencing homelessness, they are unhoused. So we really want to be mindful, words matter. And I want to thank you both for calling out the opportunity in public-private partnerships, both to play to our strengths and to sort of have the humility and self-awareness to know that we can't go it alone, which is all based on trust and relationships. I want to create space for Jonathan and Harini to weigh in. Jonathan, you've been so active with your work with WeCount. If you have anything to add, I just didn't want to pass up this moment for you. Or Harini? Good?
I appreciate it, but I'm good. I think really great content discussed by all.
Absolutely. All right. I see a head nod here. Wonderful. All right. Well, Heather, since you teed it up so beautifully, let's just go ahead and dive in a little bit further. When we think about election cycle in our daily lives, I suspect most people on this call are in the business community one way or another. And, you know, there were a couple of ballot issues in particular that were backed by organizations that I know you're involved in deeply, Heather, the Chamber of Commerce in particular, really looking at taxing transit, you know, and thinking about healthcare in terms of funding a bond to support the expansion of Harborview. You know, why does a business community weigh in on such issues? What import does that have to our daily lives in the business community?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back, I think, to my earlier point of basic functioning. We want all of the basic needs of a community to be met. Even if you are, you know, in your ivory tower someplace, your business cannot be successful without the basic needs of a community being met, and your employees cannot be happy in a community where basic needs are not being met. And we, you know, I think, as I said before, I think we do, there are edge cases, no question about it, but I think from a values standpoint, if you were to talk to a CEO, and we're going to have one on pretty soon, Matt Oppenheimer, or a entry-level employee at any service job here in the region, the things they care about, educational opportunity, climate change, racial justice, those things would be a very similar list. And it would come from a different set of experiences perhaps, but the list would be very similar. And so when you see businesses and a business organization, which is even a higher leap, because of course, you know, an organization like the Chamber has so many different members. So it's kind of always got this lowest common denominator problem, right? Because you have to find things that everybody kind of agrees on in order to take a stance. So when you see a business organization like the Chamber be pro taxes, that means that a business community is really very pro taxes. And anytime those taxes are building something that is going to benefit the community, I think you're going to see the business community take a really hard look at it. Certainly the needs at Harborview and the desire to, you know, create better mental health outcomes coming out of that bond, and the infrastructure that we need to have transit for quality of life for everybody, but also to lower our carbon footprint. Those are just, very critical issues that I think any business person would be for, which brings me back to my other thing of like, hey, let's, join hands here and work on these things together. And I think from an objective standpoint, if you were to step back and really look at the business community from top to bottom, you will see a lot of places where the business community is coming to the table and does want to participate in a constructive dialogue with what can they do to put their fair share in. I think the business community is ready for those discussions. What we need is politicians on the other side. And, yes, I am looking at you, City Council of Seattle, to come and meet us and join in that discussion from a non-ideological problem-solving perspective, but still with principles. Climate change is here, racial equity and justice is essential. And you cannot compromise on those things. And, this is what I'm, of course, expecting from the Biden-Harris administration as well, is not shutting business out, not refusing to have a conversation about what makes sense to both have job creation and all of the other things that we want to have. But, getting to that kind of dialogue is what we desperately need in Seattle.
Thank you, Heather. All right, we've got another call to action here and a reminder that the business community wants to make investments in that. We want to work and build businesses in healthy, livable communities. Let me segue into a topic that I know is close to all of your hearts, but Jonathan, you've spent your career in technology, as so many of us have, and I might ask you to wear your chair of Geekwire hat for a moment. I know that you're passionate about the role of technology when it comes to government, and there's so many issues we could discuss of national importance. Certainly in the tech sector, Section 230 has been in the limelight when we ask ourselves and leaders, what is Facebook and Twitter? How might we regulate them? Whether it's this or other key policy issues, what would you like to highlight in terms of the role of technology in our democracy? Just that. Big question.
Thank you for that really great question, which can launch off to a lot of things. So you're right. There's a lot that technology or people in technology can do to affect change. In fact, I look at the question a little bit more broadly, which is why are we people in tech good at tech? It's because we like to break things. We like to hack things. We like to think out of the box and not be beholden to the way that something was done in the past. And so I would posit, I think an interesting challenge is for us to think about, just like starting about 3.5 years ago, we had an amazing, impassioned movements, Me Too, Time's Up. I felt both just a witness to a wonderful set of things that was happening in terms of gender. And then more recently, you have the same thing. We all were passionate about change in terms of racial injustice and all of that stuff. I actually would want to encourage the tech community and anybody in general, anybody who kind of feels like that they're willing to break things and willing to sacrifice a little bit, to think the same way about how we can change or break the current political campaign finance system. And in fact, I think sort of long term, maybe it takes us a few years, maybe it'll take 20 years, but the Constitution is supposed to be a living document. We're supposed to change it. It's not supposed to stay static. I think about this concept of an Amendment 28, a 28th Amendment, which could, for example, fix a lot of the problems that we've had in the political system for the last few years. And let me give you actually just one example of that. You like that I was a math geek a little bit earlier on. I mentioned that there was really like almost a 5 million vote difference in the last presidential election. Guess how much money was spent on both sides during a presidential campaign? $8 billion. So if you do that division, $8 billion spent ultimately on 5 million votes that mattered, right? That comes out to about $1,600 per vote for one of those votes. And we have Matt Oppenheimer here. I know PicMonkey, we spend way less than $100 to acquire a customer that has a customer lifetime value of maybe, you know, about $1,600, right? If they keep renewing the pro SKU. And so to think about spending $1,600 to acquire that customer, that vote, something is kind of broken there. And I want us to think about things like, you know, should we have shorter campaign windows? Should we be, how should we rethink that whole media advertising campaign industrial complex? How should we think about the way that PACs work, that you can actually channel a lot of money that's sort of not that questioned into these PACs, right? And all of the money that gets raised. Make no mistake, for every photo that you see on Facebook of a friend posing next to Joe Biden or whoever, that person paid for that photo. And the productization of candidates has been a and Racquel, I know you were an Obama, you know, I'm guilty as charged. I got my photos with Barack, right? You know, but once you kind of window into that system, you can start to question, like, wow, is this really the way that we spend money? And to kind of stitch it together, you know, into a theme, you know, for half of the $1,600 per that vote acquired, for half of that money, you could actually get a family off the street who is experiencing homelessness and there. So anyway, all of that is to say that we should probably in the way that we've attacked some of these big social problems in the last few years, we should consider, okay, how do we direct our energy to how we actually elect our federal officials? So I'll leave it at that because I've gone long here.
Thank you. No, and you know, the question around technology and democracy, you really expanded to STEM. You're using science, tech, engineering, and math again, calling out issues of campaign finance and better deployment of funds. Heather, I know you want to weigh in, and then Harini, and I've got a couple questions teed up from the audience Q&A that we'll go to after that.
Just super quick, because I love creating controversy. I think I agree with Jonathan 100% that we need to create the reform, but I think one of the ways that we've gotten into the fix that we're in right now, and one of the things I want us to stop doing, myself included, is to think that we tech people can reinvent things, and instead of getting behind people who already are doing the good work, just need more resources and, you know-how. And so whenever we talk about breaking things and, you know, and hacking and all of that, I'm like, oh, this sounds too much like, you know, us thinking we're the smartest people in the room. And if you just let a tech person in there, we can fix it. So that's not what Jonathan was saying, but that's what I hear a lot. And I want us to become much more humble. And believe me, I'm putting myself as exhibit A here. I often, you know, kind of convene a bunch of people and say, let's fix this thing. And really all I had to do was say to the person that I've now convened, you know, what can I do to help you do your job? Because they're already doing it. And I'm just causing a bunch of extra kerfuffle for no good reason.
Yeah, no, I hear you 100%. And Heather, I appreciate that extra acknowledgement that you recognize that that's not what I was saying. You know, even a constitutional amendment is working within the framework of an existing constitution. And I too agree that we don't always have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. The arrogance thing is actually also a good point. But I have to necessarily say things in a way that makes people feel good about who they are. That, hey, you can do it because you can break things. So make change in the world, right? So forgive me.
And, you know, to quote the Aspen Institute, as much as we all like to move quickly, you know, change can only move at the speed of trust and relationships. And you're both calling out some great issues. Harini, I want to pick up your comment and then I'll go to an audience question.
Sure. There are so many places I could go from there. But the first thing is, I think there is the humbleness piece is such a good one. I've just gone through my first budgeting exercise and realized that city and public service budgets work nothing like corporate budgets. So I highly encourage tours of duty. I think we should, back to Heather's bridge building, we should cross-pollinate and have tech employees go work for public institutions and vice versa. So we all come out better for the experience. But my second thought was to Jonathan's piece on funding, right? This is the big barrier to entry for all of us, for regular people with no famous last names or no trust funds to run, because of the barrier of funding and the cash that's in a campaign. So +1 to that, and I think the money that goes from that should go out to access and connectivity and making sure all children are able to learn and they have food, which is incredible that so many of our public schools are often the primary meal source of meals for our children, right? I have a 6-year-old and I didn't know that until recently. So take that money and let's put it to where it can be of good use.
Thank you. Racquel, I want to go to you. And I think that as in this conversation, we can actually pick up one of the audience questions from Priya. Thank you, Priya, which was really addressing this very issue. How might we use technology to engage in civic issues? She called out better access to healthcare. Jonathan has already responded in terms of better investments in homes and affordable housing. So with that lens, and I saw you agreeing violently with the characterization of the budget process, please chime in on how we can use
painful days. I still have PTSD from my days in DC on that front. I just wanted to call out, especially for our audience, but just in general, is that the barriers to public service is not just in the elected lane, it's also in being a staffer, right? And so we have a lot of work to do on both fronts because representation matters there as well. And I can say in Washington, DC, for sure, you know, oftentimes you cannot get a job without experience, and you cannot get experience without doing an unpaid internship. And, you know, it's very hard if you come from a lower income background to do an unpaid internship. I have my own personal experience with that. And thankfully, I had a professor at University of Miami who said, ask UM to pay for it. And so they paid for my airfare and they paid for my room and board, which allowed me to do that internship in DC in that summer. Otherwise, I would not have been able to do it because my family couldn't have afforded that. And so I think that we need to think about the barriers to both elected offices, but also public service writ large, and the barriers to that for those who've had different experiences in life. But to the question that Priya asked, and I think it's a great one, you know, I go back to, you know, how, and we've all touched on it a bit here, is that, you know, I think technology has a role to play, and the private sector more broadly has a role to play. And the reason why I'm so passionate about that is from my time in the Obama White House. One of the reasons why I felt like I could come to the private sector initially and still make an impact is that when I was in the Obama White House, I started in the late summer of 2010, and within 2 months, we lost Congress and we weren't able to legislatively get as much done. And I was there for over 3 years. And what we had to really do was use our bully pulpit to advance the president's agenda. And oftentimes how we did that was through public-private partnerships. So the majority of my time in the White House was spent actually working with the private sector to advance issues around financial literacy, around homelessness, around housing issues, you know, around youth employment and opportunity youth. All of that was done a lot through public-private partnerships. So I know the power of it from the other side, right? From sitting on the public sector side. And I think when I think about the attributes that those companies, often tech companies, brought to bear, it was, again, that level of humility and a level of sincerity of truly wanting to help, and not necessarily just wanting to get like good PR from it, right? But looking to really help and doing a lot, sometimes behind the scenes, and not necessarily getting all the accolades for it, but helping us move the needle and make a difference in that way, were attributes that were really important to some of our successes in the Obama White House. So
thank you. Kudos for your work. And that resonates just even with my service at the local level. So thank you again. I've got time for one quick anonymous question directed at you, Harini. We heard about the importance of staffing in the public realm, but we did have a question about how in the world you can balance your life in public service with your day job. Any quick tips?
I'm also curious about that, Harini. So.
I was going to say, every one of you on this panel are living it. We are all living it together. I think it's priorities, right? I don't do anything that's not a priority. And I believe that representation is so important. It is, especially 4 years ago, it was not an option to walk away. We don't have the luxury of being there to say, oh, it's okay if I don't do it. We all have to do it. And we have to do it because our children are looking for role models. My son and his generation need to believe in the promise of our country, in the promise of our state. And we have to do our bit. And I know all of us serve in so many different ways. And as a tech leader, if there are skills that I can bring to my community, if I can and we all stand on the shoulders of giants, so there are folks before me who've shown the path forward. And if there are others I can show the path to, absolutely, we should do it.
Thank you. Again, we are closing in on the end of our time. And Harini, I'm going to offer you a hall pass, given that you are not in a position to make any endorsements. But for the rest of you, Racquel, Heather, Jonathan, I want lightning round, binary answers only. You get to choose either your top pick or your top prediction for President-elect Biden's cabinet. Ready, set, Racquel.
I wanted to take a pass on this too, my best guess is that Susan Rice will have a role in the administration, and I'll stop.
You also made the bold prediction that we're going to see the return to technologists perhaps in the White House.
Oh yeah, I mean, I definitely think, and I don't know if it'll be in cabinet roles per se or like cabinet secretaries, but I think that there are a lot of Obama-Biden alumni who, after the Obama-Biden administration was done, came into the tech community like myself. And there are many of them who left and returned to the campaign, to the transition. And so I expect to see a lot of folks who now understand the tech community a bit better, returning to public service in the Biden-Harris administration.
Thank you. Heather, Jonathan, did either of you bring your crystal ball this evening? Care to weigh in? I'm giving out all passes if not.
No, I think, this will be controversial. So again, throwing in some controversy. I know Jay Inslee pledged he wasn't going to go off and join the cabinet, but I really think he should go be climate czar. I think Denny Heck will do an awesome job as an interim governor. Another person I would classify as having that reach across the aisle perspective. So my prediction is Mr. Inslee, governor, will head off to the cabinet.
Heard it here, folks. Jonathan, care to weigh in?
I think a really easy one for me is, I think, to Racquel's point about some Obama people going back, is I think Tom Perez, who, as many of you know, was DNC chair. He'll probably go back to something, either to labor or to commerce, because he's done both of those already. So maybe he goes to labor. And my other prediction, I think I can sneak another one in, is probably perhaps Andrew Yang on commerce. So I think that would be really interesting. Make America think harder. And so those would be two.
Wonderful. Well, you've all given us such great ideas about how to engage, whether we're running for office, serving as a staff member, or just being residents who care about our region and our communities. I want to give you one last opportunity to weigh in. If there's a resource you were dying to share, or a technique for engagement that you didn't get a chance to share, please do it now. Otherwise, I'm going to pass it off for the next session. Any parting comments, famous last words, Jonathan, Racquel, Heather, Harini? All right, thank you all. Let's please join me in thanking this incredible, inspirational panel that has their head in the clouds but feet on the ground when it comes to getting to the hard work of civic engagement. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Nick for the Keystone conversation. Thanks again, everyone.
Great job, Rebecca. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you to all the panelists as they are disappearing into the background. Hi, everybody. I'm Nick Merriam, and I am the CEO of sea.city. We are a tech industry nonprofit really focused heavily on growing the impact and engagement of our sector. And this has been just a wild and very exciting election season, at least from my viewpoint. A big thanks to all the panelists that were just on and sharing their insights, and a big thanks to the audience for sticking around this evening. I am really pleased to have a keynote conversation here with Matt Oppenheimer from Remitly. Matt is the co-founder and CEO of Seattle-based Remitly, the mobile first provider of remittances and financial services for immigrants. We're really fortunate to have people like Matt here in our area as he grows innovative and needed products and really is regularly recognized for his commitment to community. So Matt, a big thanks for joining us this evening.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so I just want to dive right on in here. And, Remitly is still a relatively young company. You have yet to IPO. At the same time, your company has taken some stances on national public policies that have directly and negatively impacted immigrants in the US. From my perspective, this seems a bit unusual, as most tech execs at your stage of growth really seem hyper-focused on product and kind of don't get around to policy issues until a little bit later in their life cycle. Can you just talk to us a little bit about how you go about making these types of decisions and what sort of stances you've taken over the past year or two?
Yeah, great question. And, before that panel before us was amazing. And it was so fun to listen and learn to that group. And round of applause to them. So, there were a couple themes in there that I'll build on. One, understanding business's role versus kind of politicians and government experts' role, I think is one that I'll come into this conversation with humility. And the second is, I think, there's just leadership has never been more important in our country and globe. And so I think going to your question, Nick, our vision is really to transform the lives of immigrants and their families by providing the most trusted financial services on the planet. And that embedded in that vision is really, focus on equity and access. And so in that vision, as I mentioned, immigrants are our primary customers. And as part of building the most trusted financial services for immigrants on the planet, advocating for our customers is incredibly important. And we've integrated that from day one into our culture. So really, that's why we speak out against policies that could harm hardworking immigrants. And hardworking immigrants also are obviously, just crucial to the success and vibrance of the communities we live in and the country that we live in. And so we try to lead by example with our advocacy efforts. And some of the examples that folks might have heard about, but if not at the federal level, is I had the honor of testifying in front of Congress around some anti-immigration bills. During that same testimony, I talked about the harm that a remittance tax to fund a border wall would do. We spoke out against baseless and counterproductive immigration suspension that was signed by the president earlier this year. And we're also, initiating internal conversations around tough topics like anti-racism and voting. And giving our team the kind of time and resources to get involved there. And today, finally, we joined the Washington Coalition of Business for Racial Justice and signed a letter separately to Mayor Durkin urging police reform. So why we've done that earlier, I think it all ties back to our vision. It all ties back to our customers. And we're a unique company in that we serve immigrants. And so we can be especially vocal on issues that impact our customers.
Thanks for that. Sorry, I've got some kids in the background, and so I'm going on and off mute to try and limit the amount that they're coming through. So
I do too, yeah. By the way. So if I go on and off, that's why.
Cool. Yeah, don't be surprised if the little one toddles in here and tries to crawl in my lap. So there we go, COVID life. So I do want to dive into a little bit of a specific case. So you recently wrote an opinion piece in the Seattle Times talking about immigration and noted some statistics about the broader populace being pro-immigration and how immigration is in many ways pivotal to the success of the US. I kind of want to keep digging into your thinking around some of these pieces. Can you just talk a little bit more about the links that you see between sort of public policy and your communication strategy and really how do you make decisions that you're going to engage on either a local level or a national level or even a global level?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think you mentioned the Seattle Times piece, but our strategy from a communication standpoint, just remains consistent, whether or not we're talking to a local publication or national publications that we've either had op-eds in or been quoted in. Our other philosophy is we try to avoid anything that's too political, and we'll definitely take a stand against something that's just wrong. as you heard a minute ago, will take very active stances against anything that is against immigrants or immigration, or proactive stances for things that are pro-immigration. And so that is something that, regardless of whether it's local, regional, national, is a principle that we focus on. But we also don't want to focus on, kind of, or fall victim to performative allyship. And so if we do decide to speak out, we'll try to always back up our words with action. Also understanding that, especially when we're talking about topics like racism, that it's not an action or a moment in time, it's a lifelong journey. So approaching those things with humility, but not just shouting from the rooftops from a communication standpoint, rooting it in action and trying to stay focused on that action for the long term. So it's not just a moment in time.
Yeah, so when you're looking at sort of the new Biden administration coming in and Democrats holding the majority of the House, Senate is at the very best, and it seems like a little bit of a long shot that it might be a Dem Senate, but more likely a Republican-controlled Senate. Like, knowing that these three bodies need to work together, and at the same time, our community seems very polarized and divided. Like, how do you see immigration reform happening in the future? Or do you see immigration reform in the future?
Yeah, well, I think that I'll start by saying that, and you heard this in the panel before, I think we need to start by just opening the dialogue and committing to not just hearing each other, but truly listening. And I think America's ready for that. I mean, I grew up in Boise, Idaho. Boise is the capital. It's different than rural Idaho, but different than Seattle, different than other places that I've lived. My Facebook feed may be one of the few Facebook feeds that actually has like a wide range of political views on it. And I think that the first thing we got to do is listen to each other and find channels and find ways that we can really not just hear, but listen and understand different points of view, and stop having, it's them as opposed to, we're all Americans and how do we work together to solve problems. And I'm personally passionate about that, just given my background and quite frankly, friends across, the aisle. And I think that we've also have to do away with just harsh and anti-immigration rhetoric. It's dominated so much of the conversation the past few years. It has been completely unjust and unfair to immigrants and just counterproductive. It's not solving problems. I mean, I think we know that from history, that blaming a specific group for problems does not actually solve them. And so I think that's the second thing, is we need to do away with that, because at the end of the day, anyone who studies American history, this country and our economy is made rich and vibrant because of contributions of immigrants and, just diversity more broadly. And so I hope we see swift undoing of some of the policies that have created kind of unfounded fear of immigration in the country. Biden's already laid out, plans to fully restore the DACA program. Again, it's not about Biden, but I think that just fully restoring the DACA program is a big step in the right direction from a policy standpoint. And I think we'll also see some quick reversals of the travel and immigration restrictions, which I think are all very important things to start not blaming immigrants and focusing on the issue so we can start to come back together. I do not think it's going to be an easy road ahead. I think there's so much division in our country. I think there are a lot of systematic issues, some of which were talked about on the panel, that divide people further. But I am hopeful and optimistic about the future. And, our focus as a company and my focus as a leader is going to be, how do we just continue to focus on impacting and improving the 45 million immigrants living and working in the US.
Yeah. And I don't know if you saw this, but this weekend, a federal judge actually ruled that the stalling that the administration has done around DACA can't stand, and that DACA is in need of going forward as SCOTUS ruled earlier this year. So I think that's trending in the right direction. It appears our legal system is actually working. So that's fantastic. Quick follow-up question on some of what you just talked about. I mean, as a tech leader, how are you reaching across the aisle? I mean, you have a particular focus on immigration, which is generally a topic for the Democrats, but what does that look like for you personally?
Yeah. I think it's a great question. And on the DACA point, I just want to hit on one point related to that. And we may get to just DEI work later, but I think that DACA was one that really, really is one to take to heart. I mean, I've been on panels over the last couple of years with DACA recipients, and the fear that they have been living in with some of the turmoil over the last few years is just unjust and wrong. And yet you have DACA recipients that are out there on panels, advocacy, publicly speaking out against that to their own risk. And so I think when it comes to DEI and when it comes to even issues around immigration, it's important to circle back to it's the work of privileged populations and privileged individuals like myself to speak out for what's right. And that's where I see there being an incredibly unique opportunity for us to do that for our customers. In terms of how I reach across the aisle, I think that it goes back to listening. And I try to listen both in my personal life to people of diverse viewpoints, and I mean diverse in the broadest sense of the word. And I think it also, when I say listening, like to listen, we all have to reflect on our own views and own biases and own reflections. So again, we may get to DEI in a minute, but I hosted 2 book clubs. This is less related to policy. Actually, let me answer policy, and then we get to DEI later. But on the policy front, when I think, despite some of the systematic issues there are out there, when I think about when I testified in front of Congress, and you talk about an issue like the border wall, I think that and taxing the border wall, there are really arguments for both sides. That taxing remittances to fund a border wall is a bad idea. And I think on the conservative side of the aisle, if you do something like that, it pushes a lot more underground. And from a terrorist financing and drug trafficking perspective, nobody wants more money moving internationally without it being tracked and preventing bad activity. The reality is, if you add a tax, it will do that. And you had, I think, clear, compelling argument for that. And on the liberal side, there's just a social justice and other element to why that's a bad idea. But before I made those comments, we really thought and listened to both sides of the aisle and say what would resonate. And if we stay focused on a policy level and never get into politics, never get into partisan issues, I think we also have the luxury of not having this back and forth and just saying, let's focus on what's right and let's focus on what's right for immigrants. And that's how I've tried to reach across the aisle from a policy standpoint.
Yeah. I frankly really appreciate your sort of customer obsession here and to the ends at which you take that. I mean, it really is quite impressive, the lengths that you go. I want to flip over into some of the DEI pieces that you've been talking about and local issues. So on the heels of all the demonstrations in support of Black Lives this summer, there's been a lot of discourse about the role of police. King County voters this election cycle voted strongly to approve the charter amendments that will restructure the role of sheriff, theoretically limiting the autonomy of the role and shifting more authority over to the to King County Council, not to be confused with Seattle City Council. So as a community-minded tech leader, how do you think these changes are going to go?
Yeah, it's a good question. I probably ask you that question. You'd have a better answer given your knowledge of this space. What I will say is the majority of people recognize we have work to do, not only in King County, but beyond. And I think that people are divided in how we get the job done to do that. But having the right, police or sheriff, groups with the right amount of responsibility is something that I think everybody wants to focus on. The question of, should that be appointed or elected, and how does that impact, the talent pool, the question of who should set the responsibilities of the sheriff department in that instance. I think we get caught up in the how, and I think it's really important to start with, to the point of bringing people together, why are we talking about these issues and what do we want to solve for? And when we start there, then I think we can get to Charter Amendments 5 and 6. Those are obviously passed at this moment, but we can get to topics like that and collectively talk about what is the right way to get to what I think we all collectively really want to solve.
Yeah, I'll spend just a little bit on this topic. Yeah. Earlier this summer, you were very public about being an ally to the Black community. Can you just talk to us a little bit about the work that Remitly has done in that area over the last number of months? I would expect that it extends actually before the last couple of months. So feel free to pull in whatever you like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, again, I'll start this point with, I still personally have a lot of work and education to do myself. And I think that's really important anytime that there's a topic of DEI being discussed. I think that we're in a unique position to serve a very diverse customer base. And so it's even more incredibly important for us to focus on DEI. And we tend to have a pretty diverse team, although there are areas in our team we need to really focus not only on increasing diversity, but also equity and inclusiveness. And we have worked on this for a longer period of time. But I think that, after George Floyd's murder, we gave our Seattle team a day of action by really reallocated company-wide resources and encouraged them to spend time learning, reflecting, and taking action again, not just talking, on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We did an anti-racism workshop with amazing talent we have internally that led that, both our global head of DEI, Kim Vu, and leaders in the company that have a lot of expertise in the space led that anti-racism workshop. Our exec team matched donations up to $25,000 against anti-racist causes. We gave employees the day to observe Juneteenth. So again, it wasn't just right after George Floyd's murder, but we tried to continue that learning. And then one of the most impactful things for me personally, and this is where I was going to go earlier when I was talking about, kind of reaching across the aisle, is that, I have an ongoing book club with the team where I first read So You Want to Talk About Race by E.G. Oluo. And then I read How to Be an Anti-Racist by Professor Kendi, or Dr. Kendi. And I think that both of those books were really eye-opening for me. And I think by leading by example and having humility, and we have an office in Spokane, we have offices in Seattle, we have offices around the globe, with a wide range of people, and where they're at on their DEI journey, and joining the team in that, I think, has been one of the most impactful things for me, because I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot over the last few months, and I still know this much, and I need to continue my learning and lead by example there. So everyone in the company can be open around the shortcomings that we have here, and using, Dr. Kendi's point, not just try to say, hey, certainly not say, hey, racism isn't a problem, but really focus on how do we actually be anti-racist and actually break down systemic racism to where we can make improvements as a company and as a community.
Yeah. Thank you for giving us a few more details on that. I mean, I definitely hear really the action that you've put into place through the company and helping build that culture around making sure that these conversations are active and open. As a side note, since I know you have kids, I don't know if you've seen Dr. Kendi's kid book also. So we have that floating around our house.
Same.
Yeah. So really my last question for you, and then we're gonna have to shut down and wrap up so people can get about their evening. But it's really unique and amazing that Remitly encourages its employees to be civically engaged. How do you navigate all the potential pitfalls of talking politics and social issues in the workplace? Like, do you have filters by which you sort of go through to understand which issue to address or to not address? I think it might end up being more of a question of like, what do you leave off the table and why would you leave it off the table?
Yeah, great question. I think, there's three principles, and then I'll tell you the three questions that we ask ourselves more broadly. The first principle is, as you've heard, stay focused on issues that impact our customers. And so we're always going to circle back first and foremost. And if it's anything immigration related, you can trust we're going to be part of the conversation. The second is remain nonpartisan, because that's going to help us make the biggest impact in the long term. And then the third is, outside of immigrant related issues, there are just some issues that impact our employees and are just, quite frankly, wrong. And we will jump in those instances and take a stand, because it's just important to do that, to take care of our employees and to do what's right in the world. So those are the principles we use. And then, at a more tactical level, we kind of ask ourselves three basic questions to determine if and how we should get involved. Does the issue align with Remitly's vision and value? Can Remitly have a meaningful impact or influence on the issue? And three, will our customers, employees, and investors agree with us getting involved? And again, that goes back to those principles. But if we ask ourselves those three questions, it'll always circle back to, a nonpartisan approach and focusing back on our customers or things that are just truly unjust and wrong in the world we need to speak out against.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming this evening. Really appreciate you taking a little bit of time to chat with me and our audience. So a big sea.city, Create33, New Tech Northwest round of applause for you, and deep appreciation for all the work that you do.
Thank you all. And thank you all for the work you do in the community. It's so incredibly important. So thank you.
Great, thanks. So before we fully wrap up, I just want to close out this session and give a big thanks to all the speakers that participated this evening. We really appreciate them showing up and spending some time to talk to this great audience. Just as a reminder, elections happen every year. And civic engagement is something that you can do all throughout the year. We heard it multiple times this evening that everything from volunteering and donating and just being aware of what's going on in your community is something that you can do to make sure that you are educated, connected, informed about all the different issues that are happening. We also heard that as we look to 2021, there are going to be a number of different types of races that are happening. Seattle has a mayoral race as well as 2 city council seats that are going to be up for election. Across King County, there are a handful of county council members. If you don't know what county council member, what they are, make sure to check that out. They're basically the legislative body within the county, as well as the executive, who is currently Dow Constantine. Let's keep up this record-setting level of engagement that we saw over this last election cycle. We need you. We want you to stay connected. There's a lot of ways to do it. One of the best ways to do it is to make sure that you're staying connected, either with an organization like us at sea.city or New Tech Northwest, who also brings in civic content. Create33 has great civic content that they bring to their folks, or you can just get engaged with a nonprofit in the community that supports an issue that you're interested in. That, frankly, is one of the best ways that you can start to dip a toe into this community and civic engagement world. Thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate having you here this evening, and we are ending only 1 minute behind. So have a wonderful evening.